Hello, I'm Liz Scarf and welcome to the first episode of this, what I think will become a little bit of a series called What to Do, How to Say, where I answer your questions about how to deal with tricky communication situations. Now, mostly in the context of group facilitation, because that's a lot of where I kind of work in that space, but also you can ask questions relating to any work contexts that involve communicating with people, which is a lot of work contexts. And also I'll answer the occasional personal life context questions too, so feel free to submit those. If you want to submit a question, look in the notes section below the video and you'll find a link there. And this is the only way to submit questions. So if you email them or contact me through other mechanisms, it's not going to work, just this link. So in my work teaching facilitation, the most asked question I get is about how to deal with participants who talk too much. Well, I say talk too much, right? So I thought it was a really great question to kick this series off with. Now, before I get started, and I'm going to say this every video because it's really important. So in my answers, I'm going to provide some analysis of why this issue might be happening, because understanding the deeper process is more helpful than just giving direct advice or suggestions about how to respond, but I will do that as well. However, my language isn't your language. I'm a white middle-class cisgendered woman, and this positionality, coupled with my beliefs, my temperament, that all means that I use language in certain ways. Now, your identity, your style, your beliefs, and the cultures and contexts you work with could all mean that my advice is completely unsuitable for you, but hopefully though it's somewhat adaptable. And that's what I really encourage you to do. So don't copy paste it, like make it your own and make it appropriate to your context. So basically take what resonates, leave what doesn't. So let's get into it. People who talk too much in groups. So first some analysis of this and then a bit about a few ideas about what to do. The broader issue that we are talking about here is how do we manage the most precious resources of a group, which are time and attention. These are like the core resources of every group is time and attention. So people who are speaking more than feels fair are using more of the group's central resource. And that's why it can be quite irritating, or it can be irritating for a range of reasons and disturbing to a group. Now we have to manage this for a range of reasons in the facilitation role. So others in the group can start to dislike the person who's who's talking too much. And it's also a background sort of part of our job as facilitators to help people build skills for group work, and this will help them build skills. We also have a job to get done in groups, usually like there's a contracted reason that we're there for, whether it's a formal contract or not, there's an agreement about what are we there for. Also equity. So, and this is a big reason why it's disturbing in groups, there's an inequitable situation happening when one person is talking too much. So the distribution of resources is an equity issue. Speaking time is the resource that is being unfairly distributed in those moments. And diversity is another reason why we need to manage, right? Hearing from a wider range of people in the group makes whatever we are working on together better. We need the benefit of different lived experiences, different belief systems, different skill sets. So it's actually just going to enrich our work to hear from more people. Also group sustainability. Groups that are dominated by a few individuals, they won't actually last long or won't even get off the ground. So people either stop coming literally, physically, or they will stop coming psychologically. So they might have to attend, say in work meetings, but they're not really turning up anymore. And if this isn't a work context or a business organisation context, the impact on staff, sort of morale, satisfaction, productivity, is really big. And also it can hamper people's development by letting them talk too much in a group. And I'll kind of say a little bit more about that now, because the next part of the analysis is just understanding why do some people take more space than others, and there are a lot of reasons, and I expect that they intersect. So some people are just more engaged in the topic, like they're actually just there, their brains, their bodies are just more engaged in the topic. They have more to say, more questions to ask. Some people, sometimes it'll be about personality and temperament types, so that kind of extroversion, introversion thing, which of course is quite complex, but that's part of it. I also think about the way people thinking styles and processing styles. Thinking is obviously very complex, but I boil it down sometimes to people who think with their brain and by talking, and people who think with their body by sensing. And so people, and I'm like this, who more commonly talk to think, we're more likely to use more of the space than others because that's how we're thinking. And also because it means we've got to talk quicker because we haven't waited to sort of sense and work out and feel and percolate in our body what we think about what's going on. We're using talking to think. So I think that sometimes there's a processing style difference. Some people they're quite unaware of others. They're quite unaware of themselves and how they impact others and how they are in a group. And they have a lack of capacity to actually self-manage. So they can't actually notice that they're talking too much and say to themselves, okay, now don't talk. Another one is some people are uncomfortable with silence. Another one is having privileged identity characteristics with little awareness and not understanding how this manifests in a belief in your own opinions and the ease and the safety in which you have of sharing those opinions in a group. So some people with low awareness about their privilege can unintentionally take up a lot of group space, not thinking that there's any problem. Now, some people also have a thwarted or an unlived leadership or teacher process, right? So when they're in a group, not in the teacher role, they unconsciously, or not in the leader role, they unconsciously act out as teacher leader type role. And they actually need more support to be the person up the front or to be the facilitator, and finding ways in which you could help them do that rather than be a problematic participant would be really good. I just noticed I need a drink. I've got my water. Here we go. The last point I'll make about why people sometimes talking too much, and there's going to be more reasons than this, by the way, but like trauma. So trauma can have a big impact on people's boundaries and can also leave people with unprocessed and unheard experiences that will sometimes come out in inappropriate contexts. And that need for witnessing and support and the boundary issue can sometimes create a difficult situation. So, what to do? Now, I think this comes in maybe 5 categories of what you can do about it, but I'm only going to address the last 2 because they're the actual communication moments. But I'll say the first 3 too, just to give us a bigger picture of what this means as a facilitator. So the first one is that there is sometimes inner work that you will need to do to be able to intervene and interrupt people. Say if you're from a culture where interrupting others is rude, or a particular kind of family background, or a social identity that is less entitled to speak or interrupt, you might need to do some inner work on that. I certainly had to work on it a bit to learn how to be a more bold facilitator who could interrupt people. Now, I did mention cultures where interrupting is rude. Obviously, there's going to be some cultural contexts that you might not be able to interrupt at all. So I just make it say, yep, that could exactly be the case. I'm not saying every context is interruptible. Now, there's also pre-group preparation. Now, this is, again, not applicable to all contexts because you don't always get this opportunity, but sometimes you can find out who are the talkers ahead of the gathering, and you can work out some strategies and interventions to support that group space and to support that person to better share the space. And you can find out what different kinds of privileges are in the group, and again, work out some design features and prepare some interventions that will help sort of more equitably distribute the group's time resources. The third one is, of course, structuring your group design to support more contributions. And there's you Google stuff like that. There's a whole range of technologies facilitators use in terms of structuring group spaces to support more contribution. And the last 2 that I will tackle is the framing work that you do with a group before it starts, or at the start, to help them be more aware collectively of sharing speaking time and getting permission to make interventions. And the other one is then how to actually interrupt people and get them to stop talking without shaming if possible. And you can do it where you're not saying anything shaming. Doesn't always mean that it's going to be received like that, because some people have a lot of internal shame sensitivity, and so they'll shame themselves really quickly. And sometimes you can't do a lot about that. Okay, so the 4th point, framing talking time and sharing space. So I'm going to give you an example of something I might say at the start of a workshop. It's a bit long, but I think the framing at the start of a workshop actually has a really big impact, or start of a group. And then I'll sort of explain a little bit about what I did in that framing. So here we go. Here's what I might say. So it's really important to hear from everyone who wants to speak in the group, but for a range of reasons it can be easier for some to speak than others. Certain characteristics give us more or less centrality and privilege within a culture, which can make it harder or easier to speak into a space like this. Some of these characteristics include race or gender, sexuality, religion, first language, ability, disability. There might also be differences in organisational hierarchy or education levels that can make it difficult or more easier. And some people feel shy in groups and others don't, and that can also make it easier for some and not others. So, and there's maybe a bunch of other reasons too that can make it hard to speak, but I also know that it comes at a cost to not speak when you want to. And that it's also if you are someone who it is really easy, sometimes it can feel difficult to hold back to share space for others to speak. And I get that both sides can be tricky. But if together we also understood that time and attention are actually our shared resource together, and it is a collective effort for us to share it well. So if you're someone who does find it easy to talk in groups, or certainly in this group, and therefore perhaps you might have a tendency to talk a lot, you do have a responsibility to self-manage, and I really want to support you to do that, to make space for others who don't find it so easy. And for those who don't find it easy, you are welcome to let me know in whatever, if there's anything I can do to make it easier. You can tell me directly in front of the group, or privately in the break, or if we're online, people can put it in the chat. But I also invite you to take more space than you might usually think to take, because the more people who are contributing in this space, the better. And of course, trying our best, as I know we all will, there might still be times where, as the facilitator, I might need to interrupt some people or ask for input for those who haven't spoken yet. Is that going to be okay with everyone? I know it's a bit, but is that going to be okay? All right, that's the end of the spiel. So you obviously, this is just like an example. It's not like, hey, say it like this, it's always going to work well. It's not. And you can't do this in all groups, of course, but there might be ways you can modify it. And so in the spiel, what I'm essentially asking people, inviting or trying to offer to people is some self-awareness and an invitation and expectation to self-manage. Because it's not just my job as the facilitator to manage the speaking space, it's everyone's. And in this way, if we can somewhat prevent a sort of parent-child dynamic setting up between facilitator and the group, it's really, it's going to go much better. So the more people collaborate in making the group well, the better the group goes, and the easier your job will be. In that spiel, I've also given people a heads up that I am going to interrupt them if they talk too much, and I will call on them if they aren't talking. Now, I don't necessarily directly call on individuals who aren't talking, but sometimes I will sort of pause in a conversation and just say, just wanted to make a little bit of space for those who haven't spoken yet on this, that kind of intervention. Now, in this spiel, I'm kind of asking for permission, but I'm not really asking for permission. If I don't have permission to do my job as a facilitator, I might as well leave then and there. But I am just kind of being collaborative, but also I'm not going to drop. Like if somebody says, absolutely, I don't give you permission to interrupt me, I'm going to have to negotiate with them about it and say, actually, I can't accept that. We will have to get to some agreement about what do I do if you talk too much. I've never had that happen, but that could happen. But yeah, I'm asking for permission, but I'm also really kind of not. Okay. Hoping that's making sense and going well. Now the last thing is around how do you interrupt? And so I'm going to share two examples with slightly different contexts. So the first one is, let's say someone is going on a bit, but it's not a super personal story. So I might intervene and say, Chris, I'm so sorry, I've just got to come in here and check with you. It's so important what you're saying, but I'm also noticing the time and it's getting a bit tight. So could you just say just one more sentence to really summarize your point? Now, that's the intervention. Now you can change a lot of those words in that statement to make it more context appropriate, but there are particular elements that I think are important to be aware of. So firstly, I acknowledge the rudeness of me interrupting, but I don't make a big deal of it. I just say, oh, I'm so sorry, I've just got to come in. And then the next thing is I validate what they're saying. It's so important what you're saying. Third, I attribute my interruption to my task as time manager. So I don't make it personal. I just say, I'm noticing the time and it's getting a bit tight. And then the last one is I use collaborative language. I say, I want to check with you. So that's like a little signifier of, hey, we're collaborating on this. I'm not coming in as a policeman here, or a policewoman, or a police officer. Sorry. Or as a parent, right? I'm just, we're kind of collaborating on this. And the last thing I do, which I think is really gold in an interruption intervention, is I give them an opportunity to say a little bit more, because cutting people right off does have an increased tendency to shame people. And the extra 30 seconds or a minute that they're going to take, it's not going to make a big difference. So that's where I say just one more sentence to really summarize your point. So I'm giving really kind of quite clear instructions that I expect just one more sentence, and that it's a summary. So they're the sort of 5 elements in that intervention that I think are worth pointing out, and take or leave what works for you, but I think they're kind of helpful. And the second example I want to share is, what if the content the person is sharing is like super personal and kind of not appropriate to the space, right? Where somebody has gone into a big personal story of suffering or difficulty in a place where actually that's not what that group is there for. Like, it's not a support group or a therapeutic space. And that does happen sometimes, and it is something that scares the pants off facilitators. So here's an example of how I might word that. And then again, I'll say a little bit about the breakdown. Oh goodness, Chris, I'm so sorry to interrupt. This is such an important story. It's incredibly touching, and I'm so sorry you've gone through this. I'm really mindful though also in the moment of the limited time we have together here though, and I'm really worried we're not going to be able to do this story justice. We're really not going to be able to honour it. And I can just hear from the little that you've already shared that it's a big story. It's complicated. And it's obviously had a really big impact on you, and I'm so sorry to have to cut it short. I do though wonder that you are telling it here because there is something really important for this group to learn or know from your story. And if you're open to it, you needn't be, but if you are, if you could take just one more minute to really share what is it that we really need to understand from this story? Okay, so that's the end of the kind of how I might intervene there, right? You'll notice in that example, I make a lot more effort to validate the person and their story, because they've just done something more than talk too much. They've shared a very personally exposing story in the wrong context. So the potential for them to feel shamed is even higher. But basically in the intervention, I include the same components as the first sort of interruption. And the last bit where I say, I suspect you're telling it here because there's something really important for this group to learn or know from your story. This is an attempt to help this person finish up in a high rank position. That is, as someone with something to teach this group, rather than someone who just has suffered and has accidentally blurted it out in the wrong place. And I think this is a really important element. If we could help this person feel for a moment more in a high rank position, getting this interruption, I think is really, 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 really good. Okay. So if you've made it this far in the video, well done. It's a long video, but I really want to make these useful and tricky communication challenges are tricky for a bunch of reasons, and oversimplifying them, it doesn't actually make us more skilled. But that is the end of the first episode of what to do, how to say, and if you want to make sure you catch the next edition, you can like and subscribe if you want, or use the link in the notes section to subscribe to my blog newsletter thing, where I'll announce new episodes and I share other content around the broader topic of cultural repair. I'd love to hear what you think about these ideas about interrupting, and if you've got other ways in your work that you love to approach this or other strategies you use, please share them in the comments so we can learn together. And if you do want to submit your own question, the link in the form is below into the video notes section as two. Whatever. I don't edit my videos, it's just like here it is, and so it's full of all the mistakes, and that's also, if you want to watch again, that's what you're signing up for. But yeah, hope it was really useful, and yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.